Let's look at two more quick tips for writing better thesis statements. First, let's go back again to these original suggestions. It's a single sentence, uses the keywords. Let's look at these two in particular. So we said a thesis should offer an original focus and it should be meaningful and complex. And I think these two steps are they're a little bit looser. It's a little tougher for us to get to sometimes. Like, well, what am I going to focus on? How do I narrow that down? What do you mean meaningful? How do I add complexity? Let's focus on these two because they result in some of the issues we just went through, especially things like being too general, being a little too vague, or being too repetitive. That idea of just kind of repeating the keywords from the topic. So, how do we avoid these issues to get that focus, to get that originality, to get that complexity? I have two tips. So let's take a topic. We've seen this one, the influence of an individual's choices. What do those choices have on their regrets? How do choices influence regrets? We have our keywords there. And let's focus on one text. So let's put the author and the title and think about, so not just a text creator, but Maxine Tynes in her poem, Reach Out and Touch. That speaker, the person sitting on the bus observing those kids, how do her choices influence her regrets? So in Reach Out and Touch, how does the speaker on the bus, how do her choices influence her regrets? We could take these keywords, we could take these terms, plug it into one sentence, we have a thesis. In the poem Reach Out and Touch, Maxine Tynes suggests that an individual's choices can influence their regrets. It's one sentence, check. It uses the keywords, check. But you might be thinking, but it's somewhat vague. It's somewhat general. It's somewhat repetitive. Really, it's just the title and the keywords included and rephrased. Like, it doesn't have that focus. It doesn't have that specificity that's required to write a whole essay. So how do we take this and make it more specific? Tip number one, we're going to start by adding a couple adjectives in it. And this will help us really focus in on this one text, because when I look at this one again, I think about, okay, an individual's choices influence their regrets. That could be about any text. I mean, that could be about one of the short stories we read. It could be about really anything. So let's try to narrow that down. Let's think first about individuals. So the speaker on the bus, what type of person are they? We don't get a ton about their character, but how could we describe them a little bit better? Even by adding in just one quick adjective, I would say they're probably a thoughtful individual. We're getting like their inner monologue of what they're thinking about. They're watching this scene play out, and really, I don't know, it's affecting them. They're thinking about it. They're not the type of person to just look out the window of the bus and forget what happened. They seem like a thoughtful individual. So I've added one adjective. What about another keyword? Choices. What type of choice was that for her? I mean, we could say that was a quick choice, a rash choice. What type of choice? Maybe a mistaken choice. Like, it's not the one she wishes she had made. So we're already a little bit more specific here. We know what type of individual, we know what type of choice, and this is that much more focused on and related to Reach Out and Touch. Like, this might not apply to some other things we've read at this point. But to go one step further, a second tip, we've added a couple adjectives in. We could try to think, this is maybe the big part, especially for that meaningful and complex portion of our suggestions. So why or how is this true? Why is it true that a thoughtful individual, the choices that their mistaken choices, the one they feel like they got wrong, why are those the ones that they regret? So this is the portion where we're adding that complexity, and you're thinking, okay, why, for a thoughtful person, why do they regret those mistaken choices? So it influences their regrets because, sit with it, think about it for a little bit, and get somewhere like this. Maybe like the idea that they are the people who dwell on the consequences of their action or inaction. To me, like the speaker on the bus, she's sitting maybe, apart from the kids, a couple rows back or ahead, and she's going over it again, and she's dwelling on it again. She's not able to just look out the window and forget about it. She is dwelling on the consequences, seeing how the mother reacts, thinking about how that's going to affect the children in the future. She is dwelling on the choices, or she's dwelling on the consequences of, in her case, her inaction. That is why that mistaken choice is going to influence her to feel regret. She's a thoughtful individual who has a choice that's really not the one she wishes she would have made. It's a mistaken choice, and she's going to regret it because she will dwell on the consequences of her inaction. So, by adding a couple adjectives, by adding this why, this is true because, adding our reason why, we have turned this thesis that was fairly vague, kind of repetitive. It's just the keywords. We've turned that into this, which is more full, more complete, more specific, and it has an original focus this writer could talk about. Now, in their body, they can break down ideas of dwelling on consequences, the idea of inaction, the idea of it being a mistaken choice. Some of these terms can come up later on, and hopefully those ideas will be going, like the writer will go on to prove specifically it's seeing the consequences of her inaction. That's something that can come from this thesis and be worked with later. The first thesis, again, it's got the keywords, it's a complete sentence, but it doesn't have that complexity or that specificity that could be worked with and explained later. So the second one will result in a much stronger, more full, more complete essay. So whether it's our original 5 suggestions, the common issues we discussed in lesson, or just these couple tips for adding some specificity, hopefully you're working towards writing better thesis statements.